Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is David Novak. It is December 2nd as I film this in short sleeves because of the balmy Chicago weather we are having. And I'm not sure how this is going to go, or indeed whether I will post this or not, because it broaches a topic which I approach with a little bit of trepidation. I'm not sure how long now I have been posting BookTube videos, but I have become, to a very small degree, part of the BookTube community, as it is called. Brian at Bookish had a video recently asking, is there really even such a thing as a BookTube community? And jokingly suggesting that it might be a cult. Well, it's not a cult, but is it really anything more than disparate individuals posting videos about books? Well, indeed, it has become so, and as such, I am a late arrival to the party, so I'm not any kind of a BookTube mainstay. I'm lucky if I get a dozen views to any video that I post. But be that as it may, I follow probably a good 100 booktubers regularly and watch, if not every video that they post, a good portion of the videos that they post. And I comment and think about what they say, and in many cases, take their suggestions as to what I should read next, or even what books I should buy. Sometime before I came into the BookTube community as a content producer, as I suppose we are supposed to call ourselves, there was a little bit of a dust up over whether channels should be monetized. Some voices said that it's okay if people monetize their channels. Others said no. And this led to ruffled feathers all around. One booktuber said he was going to leave the platform. And this video that I hope to make, this topic which I hope to broach, runs the risk of leading me into that kind of territory, and I want to avoid that as much as possible. However, it has made me aware that there is a light on the horizon that suggests that my time on this platform as a regular booktuber may be limited. Now, when I opened the channel, I did it so that I could just post poems by different poets. And it was to distract myself while the presidential elections were going on between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. I just did not want to focus on the news. So every day I set my camera up on a tripod or whatever and filmed myself reading poems. And I did a good number of poems for a, 3 or 4 month window. And then when the insurrection occurred, I think that was when I decided, okay, I've done enough. Now it's a couple of years after that, fast forward, and I decided, after watching a lot of BookTube, that I wanted to become a reader. And so I have, since 2022, been reading books pretty solidly. I'm on a 2-day hiatus right now, but I've been reading a lot and branching out into new directions and enjoying it very much. One of the pitfalls with sitting in front of the camera is that I sometimes lose my train of thought. So I don't know where I was going with that sentence, but be that as it may, here I am. So I am a part of the community insofar as I watch videos. And I saw a video the other day which irked me. Now, if you watched any of my videos about Frankopan's book, The Silk Roads, you will know that I went through it. At a certain point, I had had enough, and I went through it and started marking up the book with little asterisks and underlines and all kind of things, which of course I am not finding at this point. Well, they're so light you can hardly see them, of things that irked me, and did a long video. And then one of the more recent books that I read, Other Minds, I posted a video that was way over long, about 50 minutes, just talking about the most persnickety little mundane points which irked me about the book. So as I find myself in the BookTube community, the unexpected has occurred, and I find that I watched a video the other day which irked me and which I feel like responding to. However, I come from an older world in which writers tended to be very snarky, I guess is the common phrase that has been invented to cover it. In the old days, writers were all very nasty, and we would write little things in little newsletters and stuff, just tearing one another to bits. I would say I did very little of that, but that whole mindset is still the old mindset that I operate by. And I've really come to learn in the YouTube community, especially BookTube, that is not how it works. And it's not simply a question of keeping it civil, but there is no real bonus to be gained by making some cutting remark and putting down another person. We all, and I'm obviously at the very low end of the spectrum, but even the big booktubers do not command huge audiences. Jack Edwards perhaps, but in the section that I frequent, no. And so how many of these tempests in a teapot do we need? Not many. And yet something irked me, and so I'm not going to do a response video. I sometimes watch formerly booktuber Matt Wall. Now I guess he is styling himself a writing coach I'm not sure what his BookTube channel name is. It might be I Hate Matt Wall, or maybe that's his website. But he does this thing where he'll play a video, and then there's Matt in the corner, and periodically he'll stop the video and then interject with his points. He did that recently, marvelously, with an interview done with the American poet Allen Ginsberg. Really marvelous stuff. In fact, I'll put a link to that in the description. And if I were technically savvy, I suppose I could do something like that. But on the other hand, I don't want to draw attention to the booktuber in question. I suspect, if anything, that the booktuber in question might have second thoughts at some point and decide to withdraw the video, pull it down. So I am going to try to address points without attempting to make it confrontational. And I'm not sure how good I am at that, because, as I say, the milieu from which I come is one of confrontation, where the pen is wielded as the sword with little regard for the other person's well-being. So this booktuber has a feature occasionally where poets are discussed. at this particular time, the booktuber is going through a poetry anthology and going through it chronologically. And let's see, is now reaching a point wherein anything that could be considered actual good poetry becomes the exception, not the rule. It becomes just a wild extravagance. Oh, I heard about someone who likes his poems to make sense. Isn't that weird? So that era is just around the corner in this Booktubers series of videos in the chronological sequence of the anthology as he approaches a different poet each time. He recently did a feature on the poet T.S. Eliot, which I thought was very fair and even remarked so in the comments. This latest installment, I don't believe was fair. And it's the kind of thing likely to get under my skin because the poet in question was early very important to me. E.E. Cummings, or Edward Estlin Cummings. I have done a video about my first inspiration in poetry. It occurred when I was 11, and then I gradually matured into writing more adult-like poetry. Don't know how adult-like any of it really can be said to be. In fact, the poet who was an early inspiration of mine could easily be said to have had something of a stunted maturity. At least people have suggested as much. The question I suppose that I have is, how good does a poem have to be? Does a poem have to be perfect? My own answer, of course, is no. So, you know, I started writing seriously probably at age 16, and probably age 18 or so was when I went into the class of Paul Carroll. He was a Chicago poet, one of the Beat generation. This is a selected poems with a Claes Oldenburg sketch on the cover. And I took his writing workshop. And at one point, he pulled me aside and said, "You know, David, it might be a good idea, or this is just something for you to think about. If you tried to not write in the style of E.E. Cummings for a little while." Up until that time, the manner of Cummings had totally infused everything that came out of my pen. So for at least a good solid 2, possibly 3 years, I don't recall if I took him up on his advice instantly, but something told me that he was right, and indeed he was right. When you are a young poet, a teenager, it is very easy to follow such role models as you find. And I think I mentioned in the inspiration video that I had gone quite a ways down that path in imitation of Cummings, and I did find I had to walk myself back a little bit. That's a natural occurrence as one becomes a writer and one matures. That said, this booktuber mischaracterized, misrepresented, besmirched. I would say slander, but I don't think you can slander a dead person. Cummings. And I thought that I should set the record straight. Now, he said if there are any old dude bros who want to, well, I'm not a dude bro. I don't know that terminology. It's not a phrase I would use. The booktuber is aiming his commentary toward a specific audience for which that term has meaning. It does not for me. So I am, as my video on the inspiration would let you know, I am in my own little world here. And so one of the initial salvos that this booktuber made was to say, we are up to a poet who will be known to you. His name is known to you, if only because it, by his own insistence, is universally misspelled, and that is E.E. Cummings, who, for some reason, we are told we must not capitalize the first letters of his first name, his middle name, or his surname. So, we all know Mr. Lowercase Highbrow, as Cummings referred to himself in an introduction to one of his books of poems. I can't remember which one that was. He was making an ironical statement about the accusations which took him as their target. Of course, the fact of the matter is that Cummings himself used the standard capital E in duplicate and capital C in Cummings. I believe once in a while he would use the lowercase, but he generally used the standard writing of his name. And so to say that it was by his own insistence that everybody must refer to him with the lowercase initials or lowercase letters is false. It's wrong. The booktuber in question is bloviating without substance. And so this is just the initial example of what happens when somebody who is not a critic and not knowledgeable in a certain topic allows their thinking about a certain topic to become infused with what I suppose to be some kind of a rage. So that first point is discounted. I believe that when one is a poet, one does not have the world beating down at your door to shower you with attention, shower you with accolades. And so if the use of the lowercase, which I don't wonder if it was put on the cover of his books by the publisher just because publishers do things like that. It's become popular. You see plenty of books released today in which the authors' names are in lowercase letters. It's a design question. I don't think it's a big cardinal sin. But I'm sure that he did not mind a little bit of notoriety if it helped bring him some sales, what have you. You know, he was a man singularly without pretense. He applied for a grant at I don't know if it was the work program or some state program. And I remember this anecdote from a biography I read very young. And people at that time were filling out these applications for all these things they wanted to do with their book, poems written about blah, 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 focusing, and all he filled for the page blank that they left him was just a book of poems, and he did eventually get the grant. But he did not. He did not partake of all of that tomfoolery. Uh, he was pretty down to earth in his artistry. He was a painter as well. I believe he wanted to be an artist, and I believe he was entirely genuine in that impulse. It's a natural impulse, and that he was able to stick to it was to everybody's benefit. Now, he came from, I don't know what kind of wealth he came from, but his first manuscript, his father was a big businessman, and his father had his secretary type out the manuscript for him. So that's reflecting a very different world than the world in which we inhabit, in which we all have learned how to type, and typing has become a less arduous task than on those big clunky machines. Some of us are old enough to have had some experience on those. Be that as it may, he was an artist, he was a poet, and I believe a genuine poet all the way. So, he did not insist people use the lowercase with him. Now, his poems were frequently written in lowercase letters, and he experimented with typography. So, as in the title, or not title, the first line of the short poem, which I just posted, he would have, say, a semicolon and not put a space behind it. These were his idiosyncrasies. He was playing around with type, and it seemed to have an appeal. So, Booktuber goes on, I'm sure that some dude bro out there could tell me why I can't capitalize E.E. Cummings' name. Of course, nobody ever said you can't capitalize E.E. Cummings' name, particularly E.E. Cummings. E.E. Cummings himself capitalized his name all the time. Okay, so I'm sure that some dude bro out there could tell me why I can't capitalize E.E. Cummings' name, but he was born in Cambridge, where I just was, just across the river yesterday, and although he was an intelligent guy and fairly well educated, he decided that for poetry, he would attempt the con game instead of the real thing, and it worked, as it always does in any insecure art. It always does, and almost all of the plastic arts are insecure, so that you get someone who decides on a con job. You can almost always take that to the bank. I don't really think that any con job will usher you to the bank, to be sure, but I would say that Cummings did not do any kind of a con job, unless if you want to say that he was deceiving himself. We all deceive ourselves somewhat in small ways. You look at the milieu in which he was writing. There was James Joyce. This kind of experimentation was in the air. I believe he was entirely sincere in his poetry. The last thing that I just posted another poem by Cummings, a short. Oh, no, it's not a short. It's over a minute. It's about a minute and a half. And I published the last poem from his 99. I read the last poem from 95 poems. And his poems tend to be somewhat uneven. And generally, uniquely among poets, his first line and his last line are just fantastic. This one, perhaps not so much, but there are some beautiful lines in here. So, in even the laziest creature among us, a wisdom no knowledge can kill is astir. Now dull eyes are keen, and now keen eyes are keener. For young is the year, for young is the year. Let's touch the sky with a great and a gay and a steep, deep rush through amazing day. That stanza reflects his ethos, and it is beautiful. It is gorgeous. Is the poem a perfect poem? No. How many poets have written a poem of this length, and the lines that are immortal are these? It goes with the territory of being a poet. And it is for magnificent language like that that I became enamored of E.E. Cummings. As I said, I was a young man, and his appeal generally is with younger men just starting out. Now, this booktuber reads a poem that talks about the Cambridge ladies living in furnished souls, and he says that he has no idea if that's the actual title of the poem. It could be that that's just used as a title because it's the first line. Well, you don't have to be an expert in the poetry of E.E. Cummings to know that most of his poems were not titled. When I was young, I thought that was a big deal. As I've grown up and become more familiar with the literature, I've realized that actually poems all over the place have existed with no titles, not just in English, all over the place. Titles are something that scholars like to append, particularly to things in anthologies. Now, the booktuber perhaps does not know that any decent anthology will make it clear if the poem in question has a title, or if they are just using a first line as the title. So let me see if I can. Well, this is the Norton Anthology, an old copy of it, and well, I suppose I should just go to Cummings because he's a good source. Okay. Huh. And they did not do it. So fuck me. They did not do it. So I understand the booktuber's confusion a little bit more. I thought that this was a reputable place. Now, a book, and this is a marvelous book, will just print them as they should be. And so this booktuber apparently has never read a book by Cummings. So I will give him a pass on that. A good anthology should make it clear whether the title that they give is an editorial imposition or whether it was something done by the poet. And there's various ways to address it. You can put the first line in brackets, or you can just write something, or just put some kind of a symbol. So I will give the booktuber a pass. He has not read Cummings himself. He saw what he saw in the anthologies and was disgusted and grew enraged and never pursued the poet any further. It is another example of why if you want to learn about a writer or a poet, you are best going to a critic and not somebody who is a reviewer who is a generalist. You want somebody who specifically knows about the subject. So I'm going to read that poem about the Cambridge ladies, if I can find it. This is such a marvelous book. It only gives his books up until that time, and then this was his last book, which follows, and then this was a book that was compiled after his death, and subsequent to his death, a new edition of this came out, which put all of these in there, and it was a book that I thought about, but by that time, by the time that edition was available, I had departed largely from Cummings, and I love these little volumes also. They're just probably, if I were to have to run out of the house right now because of some emergency, I would grab these two, and I would leave that behind. That's, I know, sacrilege, but let me find the poem. And so this is from his book, Tulips and Chimneys, his first book. And I don't know, I think this book reproduces his book as it was published. He intended something very much different than what was published, and that edition exists. It's a much bigger book. I believe this just follows what was published, and so you had sections of Chimneys, which were solid traditional poems, sonnets in this case, and then you had his other stuff that's kind of meandering all over the page. So this was the first poem in the Chimneys section, and he was very, very meticulous about his placement of poems, and so he obviously wanted to make a point with this. Now, the booktuber read this poem and did not give it a fair reading. You know, if I were to read Shakespeare's sonnet, "Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments." If I did something like that and gave it a bad reading, you might come away with a different impression of Shakespeare's poem. So one thing that we know about poetry is when you read it aloud at the end of a line, there is a slight pause. This is not chiseled in granite. There are cases where you can skip over that. It's up to the person reading, obviously, but just as a general principle, at the end of a line, there's a slight pause. And in a poem like this, which is a sonnet, albeit an irregularly rhymed sonnet, I think it's A, B, C, D, D, C, B, A, and then E, F, G, G, F, E, maybe something like that. Very irregular. You have to understand that none of this kind of stuff comes easy. And so people, especially when they start, and this was a young poet, when they start writing sonnets, they don't know all of the rules. And the objective at that point is just to get through it any way you can. And he does a fine job of it, all in all. So let me read the poem with the proper pauses. The Cambridge ladies who live in furnished souls are unbeautiful and have comfortable minds. Also, with the church's Protestant blessings, daughters unscented, shapeless, spirited. They believe in Christ and Longfellow, both dead, are invariably interested in so many things. At the present writing, one still finds delighted fingers knitting for the, is it poles? Perhaps. While permanent faces coyly bandy scandal of Mrs. N and Professor D, the Cambridge ladies do not care. Above Cambridge, if sometimes in its box of sky lavender and cornerless, the moon rattles like a fragment of angry candy. This was never one of my favorite poems, but it merited better than the treatment that it got. Only while listening to this booktuber did I realize that that image of the moon, akin to a candy in the box, was something that I stole and used in my very first play. It's just a nice example of how art recycles itself. And that particular image which I used in my play could not have come about without the Cummings image. He disliked the fact that Cummings referred to it as an angry piece of candy or so, and an angry candy. And all I can say to that is it's just language. If you can't say angry candy, then you can't say blind hand, till some blind hand shall brush my wing. I believe that the booktuber does not have an ear for poetry. He reads without subvocalizing the sounds. And let me say, because obviously some people, if I post this, will know the booktuber in question. He is a very good man, a very great reader. I just say, and I hate to put it this way, but I can't think of any other phrasing that's more apt. It feels that when it comes to poetry, his soul is a bit dead. His soul, in regards to all other facets of life, seems marvelously alive, but pertaining to poetry, for some reason, it just does not gel. So, we talked about the angry candy. Oops. Let me see. Because I didn't want to learn how to post the video and then stop it, and then I didn't want to especially call attention to the booktuber in question, I just used the YouTube feature of pulling down the transcript and just printing it out for myself so I could refer to what was said and hopefully not misquote or misrepresent. Then he says, it is nothing to hang a poem on, nothing at all. This isn't a poem, this is just garbage. Well, it is a poem. I have never said that it was the best poem in the universe, but how good must a poem be? It is fairly traditional for a poem. Cummings, I remember reading in some book of criticism a long time ago that once you get past the idiosyncrasies of the punctuation and the weird capitalization or lack of capitalization, Cummings is one of the more traditional of poets. An awful lot of his poems are sonnets. Just because the lines are broken up differently does not alter the rules of sonneteering. I've seen Shakespeare's sonnets presented in different ways. I've seen them presented as 12 lines with a space and then 2 lines. I've seen them occasionally with each stanza separate. Perhaps the publisher wanted to make it seem like there was more on the page. I myself have done that. As far as the text goes, it doesn't mean much. And Cummings obviously thought that the spacing and that sort of thing meant more than perhaps it does. He was charting his own course, excuse me, and trying to learn how to go. Now, he never, in his sonnets, held to iambic pentameter. He did use very secure and very correct meter in other of his poems. Not in his sonnets. He used syllable count, which has some disrepute among formalist poets. To my mind, it's a step on the way to learning iambic pentameter, so you have 10 syllables in a line. Some languages are much more fluid than English, and you can just spout out a 10-syllable, or actually more likely an 11-syllable line, and most likely it's going to be in the meter that you want. English is a little bit different, but he did not use iambic pentameter in his sonnets, so far as I know. So, indeed, that might be considered a failing. You know, I just posted that, and I just made at my YouTube channel a playlist, and I will put a link to that, because it turns out over the years, I mean, over the 3 or 4 months when I was recording different poems, I did do about 17 of his poems. So with the one I just posted, that will be 18 poems by Cummings, and you can listen to the playlist and decide whether you think his poems are worth listening to. Now, you can decide you don't care for them, and that's perfectly fine. Not everybody likes every poem. But I don't think you can question that they are poems. So the next poem starts with the line next to, of course, God, America, I. And he reads this one, but also while not pausing at the end of a line, but he interrupts it a lot to comment, to interject. So let me just read you that one. Again, not one of my favorite poems by Cummings, but it is one that's much anthologized. So it's another sonnet, and this one is perfectly Shakespearean in its rhyme scheme. Next to, of course, God, America, I love you, and land of the pilgrims, and so forth. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early my country 'tis of centuries come and go, and are no more? What of it we should worry? In every language, even deaf and dumb, thy sons acclaim your glorious name by gory, by jingo, by gee, by gosh, by gum. Why talk of beauty? What could be more beautiful than these heroic happy dead who rushed like lions to the roaring slaughter? They did not stop to think, they died instead. Then shall the voice of liberty be mute? He spoke and drank rapidly a glass of water. Okay, I take that back. So it's a mixed sonnet. The octave is perfectly Shakespearean, A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D. And then the sestet is something that you would more usually find in a Petrarchan or just some other type of sonnet. It is allowable. You can have one type of octet and a different type of sestet. It is perfectly permissible. Again, I doubt that the poem is metered. He only used meter to very specific ends. Now, on Facebook, I am friends with a guy who is a very strict formalist poet, and he does not believe anything that is not strictly metered is a poem. And he, as with many other people, when you bring up Walt Whitman, he backtracked and said, oh, well, I think he's got something going on there. I just don't know what it is. Of course, strict meter is not necessary. Hopkins used his own sprung rhythm, and there are other ways of structuring poems besides strict, say, iambic pentameter or any of the others. So Cummings did not meter that sonnet. Now let's, as I say, it's not one of my favorites. And as I said in the video about inspiration, in the world of poetry, all you have to do is hit that pinnacle one time. And if you've done that, you're a poet, you've got full honors. And do I believe that either of those sonnets did? No. But it doesn't matter. So, that last sentence, there's well, let me pull it out just so I can tell you what the booktuber got upset about. He spoke, period, and drank rapidly a glass of water. And the booktuber says it's 3 spaces after the period and there should only be 2. Now, for the last 20 years, there has not been 2 spaces after a period either. For the last 20 years, at least, there's only been 1 space ever since computers and word processors. But in the old days, on those old clunky typewriters, he is absolutely right. There was supposed to be 2 spaces after a period, but no more. So in this case, there's a space. What do we make of the space? I don't know. I've seen other poems. I want to say Beowulf, but I don't think that's it. But poems of that time period where when they are printed on the page, you can see there's a big split down the middle of every line, and it's more than 2 spaces. It's 3 or 4 spaces. I don't know. It means something to somebody. To me, it's a trivial matter. Now, the poems such as Cummings's famous poem about the grasshopper, I assume would make this booktuber livid if he saw it. And I don't know if it was included in that anthology, because since we know he does not appear to have read Cummings' work exhaustively, he probably doesn't know about that, and so it's best to leave that one. I am fine with Cummings' experiments in his grasshopper poem and other ones. The A Leaf Falls, Loneliness. It's really a marvelous playing with language. Whether it qualifies as some scholars' definition of poetry, perhaps not. I am inclined to believe that any little piece like that somebody writes, and if they call it a poem, it's a poem. If somebody calls themselves a poet, they are a poet. I don't really have an issue with that. As I said, this Facebook friend of mine has run into trouble having to walk back on Whitman. Well, poems have to be metered, but Whitman was doing something there, something mysterious. I don't quite know what it was. Okay. Do I think that the grasshopper poem will stand the test of time? Well, at this time, I don't believe anything is going to stand the test of time for humanity. It's a great compliment to say of some poet that he is a writer. He writes for all time. Not for an age, but for all time, or however that goes. At this point, it's pretty clear that none of us is for all time. None of our writings are for all time. They are all here for limited duration, and they're all going to get scattered. The grasshopper poem and many of Cummings's other poems will probably be anthologized. There is some use to see what writers were experimenting with in their day. It is a significant time period. You had so many great poets writing, and so it is nice to know a little bit about the milieu. So the oddest thing was in there, the poem uses the word could, C-O-U-L-D, but apparently in the anthology that the booktuber was using, it was misspelled, some kind of a typo. And here again, a critic would know, a critic would be familiar with the author's work and would know it was published all along, C-O-U-L-D, not cold, C-O-L-D. So the anthology that the booktuber was using had a typo, but he goes off on a rant about that. Oh yeah, so I won't belabor that point. It's, it's as with something like that, if something in a text looks like it's not right, before you explode against the author, you probably should do a little due diligence and check the text itself, check where it was originally published, and just find out. Transcription errors are not few in the history of literature. And I will just say it here before you accuse somebody of fraud. It's also a good idea to have your ducks lined up of proof. You had better be sure of that. The fraud part comes a little bit later in this. Okay, a second use of the term dude bros. If there are any E.E. Cummings dude bros who are still alive and who are willing to mansplain this poem. So he's still talking about that pause. Where there are three spaces instead of two after the period. He needs somebody to what he calls mansplaining to him, and he refers to them as elderly dude bros. No, not elder. I'm joking here. He said if there are any E.E. Cummings dude bros who are still alive and who are so older dude bros, let's say. Well, I never was a dude bro, and I was, as I say, enthralled, enamored with the writing of Cummings from the ages of 15 to 18. And although I had to backtrack, he served me well. He was a genuine spirit. So, and I am not dead yet. I think that's what I'm trying to say there. So this is reasonable. So he talks about I would hate to think that even a young E.E. Cummings thought that that was profound enough to hang a poem on. I think the transcription. Cummings thought that was profound enough to hang a poem on. It's no better than the last one of these. These are empty, stupid, shop-worn little exclamations. The only thing that makes them in any way noteworthy is the only thing that elevates them from the doggerel that a high school student would write in the margins of a notebook is their orthography. And Cummings's verses tended to the saccharine, tended to the trite. At his best, of course, he exceeded that. But as I say with poetry, we all have our failings, and we all have bad habits that we fall into. The criticism that I read years ago mentioned that Cummings also, in his choice of subject matter, was much more traditional than was common at the time. He was perfectly content to write a simple love poem, and that was not the thing at the time. If it was a bit sappy, well, when you are stepping out, you chart a course that nobody else has taken before you, and you run the risks, both on the left and the right, not meaning politically, of erring one way or the other. Better to err by keeping the door to paradise wide open than to shutting it too narrowly so that nobody can get in. And that is how the arts and that is how poetry work. We can excuse Cummings his bad poems, whether it be 3 or whether it be his entire oeuvre but 3. And then this gets odd. There's not a forbearing editor anywhere in the country who would have bought these things for even $10. Here they are in an anthology 100 years after they were written. Poetry, I have to say, and this may touch upon where this booktuber has lost his ear a little bit. Poetry exists outside of the world of money. And the booktuber prides himself on working as a reviewer, and reviewers, in essence, serve mammon. I will just leave it there. You cannot expect somebody whose exclusive focus rests upon the monetary aspect of publishing, meaning, should somebody buy this book or not, should somebody spend money on this book or not, can give you a good or just approximation. The purpose of that kind of criticism is narrow, and you need to go to a critic. Again, I'm not saying that all of Cummings's poems are godlike or whatever. I'm not saying that the gods came down from Parnassus and guided the pen of Cummings. And I believe he composed at a typewriter anyhow. So, yeah. So then he talks about the poem of Buffalo Bill. I think it's generally listed as Buffalo Bill's Defunct. Also never one of my favorite ones. Obviously, these early poems put him on the map, though. That is shaped like a bullet. I never saw that it was shaped like a bullet. Why would you do that? Well, again, it's the fraud. It's that you perpetrate a fraud on an insecure art form. People will line up to say you're a genius. Well, I don't believe that the art forms, I mean, I need a lot more clarification on that. What is meant by an insecure art form? People are insecure about their judgment. If somebody tells them, if Stephen King writes a tweet and says, this is an excellent poem, a lot of people who have not been schooled, who have not been studied, will take that and say, this must be an excellent poem. The art is not insecure. People are insecure. If E.E. Cummings felt anything about this crap at all, it's possible that the deeper reason why is because he thought all the conventional ways of versification were dead, played out, dried up. What's the point? Can't do anything meaningful with them anymore. Says who? Well, says me. I've declared it. Why do you say that? Well, I tried doing that. It was a little hard. This is much easier. I can just type this at the speed of typing and send it off. As I say, in a lot of his poems, in some poems, Cummings is extremely regular. An awful lot of his poems are sonnets, poorly metered, or not poorly metered, just not metered, unmetered. But he handles meter impeccably when he does and when he chooses to do so. So he is a talentless fraud. E.E. Cummings, a talentless fraud. He will be anthologized forever. People think of him as not only a poet, but a great poet. I don't know how much people think of him as a great poet now. Is that called an epithet? That descriptor is hurled about. It's, in the end, a meaningless way to describe a poem or a work of literature or a poet. I think I will just leave that there. I've gone on long enough. This is an hour. And, you know, this is my last book, Sonnets. And for whatever reason, vanity, I always put my other titles in there. So you've got the other books of verse I did. Now, some of them are really paltry things. Some of them are probably pretty bad. And some of them might be better than that. I don't know. And then here's my plays. And then here's my sorry attempts at prose. If, when I was young, I had met a guy like this booktuber and listened to him, this whole life's work would never have been done. If I had been told inspiration does not exist, well, it existed and it worked for me. And if I had liked the poems by E.E. Cummings and tried to pattern myself after him, and I was told, he is a fraud, this is garbage, I forget what other epithets were used, a talentless fraud, garbage. I think there was another one that was kind of like garbage, but said differently. I'm not going to look. I would probably have just walked away from the whole business. I was very lucky that I encountered Paul Carroll. He wrote poetry not at all of the kind that I care for. Here's a poem. Ode on a bicycle on Halsted Street in a sudden summer thunderstorm. It feels so neat to be a fish again. That characterizes the man. I am sure our booktuber expects more of poetry than that. But what Paul did was, Paul said to me gently, it might be a good idea for you to try writing not in imitation of E.E. Cummings for a while. See what that gets you. Thank you, Paul. Thank you very much for stopping by my channel.